Are you looking to get on the road to your dream career? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Mentor Select Podcast with your host, Derek Phillips. Always stay up to date on social media at Mentor Select and online at mentorselect.com. Here's your host of the Mentor Select Podcast, Derek Phillips.
Welcome to episode 58 of the Mentor Select Podcast. Thank you for joining us for another week of phenomenal guest mentorship. It's been an exciting week for me. My wife and I and our daughter Legacy took our first trip as the Phillips family. We flew first to Indiana, where I'm from, to visit my family. While I was there, I did actually a book signing in Indiana. But the first challenge was just getting us there. This is our first time ever flying with the baby. But our daughter Legacy did a great job. She's essentially slept the entire flight to Indiana. And then she, on the flight back from Detroit, is where we flew out of, because my wife's from Ohio, so went to visit her family as well. But on the flight back, she slept most of the way too. So our daughter is already a seasoned traveler. So we're looking forward to taking many more trips with her. One of the differences was that when my wife and I traveled in the past, we were used to just carrying one bag, a carry-on or something, traveling light. But now with the baby, we had 4 big suitcases, like 2 carry-ons. No more traveling light with kids, but it certainly was a great adventure, and we're happy to let our daughter meet her grandparents, cousins, aunts, friends, everyone. She was a celebrity, so it was a lot of fun. But today on the Mentor Select Podcast, we have a great show for you. Chris Widener, he is a international motivational speaker. He focuses on predominantly self-help. He has written several best-selling books, and he's been at it for over 31 years. So Chris is going to share a lot of valuable insight and just great mentorship with us throughout this interview. So pull out your pen and pad, get comfortable, and let's hear what Chris has to share with us. So today we have Chris Widener on the Mentor Select Podcast. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's an honor to have you, certainly. So where are you joining us from, Chris?
Beautiful, sunny, hot, scorching hot, 114 degrees today, Scottsdale, Arizona.
Ouch. It is beautiful there, but 114, holy cow.
But it's a dry heat, so.
Yeah, I'm in Dallas, so it's 100 today, but my AC is not working as well, so I'm sweating. I need to get that fixed.
I gotta tell you, I don't mind it. Everybody complains about it down here, but I don't mind it because, I was in Nashville a few weeks ago, and it was maybe 90 degrees and 90% humidity. You just sweat just standing there.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't happen here in Scottsdale. You might sweat, but the heat wicks it off before you even feel it.
Right. Yeah, definitely a dry heat. So I prefer it as well. So, Chris, on the Mentor Select Podcast, we like to get to know our guest mentors better. Can you tell us something that most people don't know about you? Just a fun fact.
Absolutely. Most people would not know that from the age 11 till the age of 18, for 7 years, I was a ball boy for the Seattle Supersonics NBA basketball team. So I grew up my teenage formative years in an NBA locker room and got to know some great people. I got to see some amazing basketball. I sat right on the court. And I got to see some of those legendary basketball players, Julius Erving and George Gervin and Elvin Hayes and, all those great guys, Artis Gilmore, and just some really amazing players play basketball, a few times a week. And even the second year that I worked for the Sonics won the NBA World Championship in 5 games against the Washington Bullets.
Nice.
And I was in a ticker tape parade with 500,000 people. Through downtown Seattle, so that was pretty crazy. It's hard to go. It's hard to go up from there when you've been in the centerpiece of a ticker tape parade through a major city. It's a pretty heady kind of stuff for a 13-year-old.
Wow, not too many 13-year-olds or 30-years, 40 can say they've experienced that.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. So you can say you're actually an official member of the NBA.
Yep, I'm a member of the NBA. 7 years.
7 years. That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. Here on the Mentor Select podcast, we like to encourage our listeners to follow their passions because we believe it'll lead them to their dream career. Can you tell us how you followed your passions throughout your career?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been a speaker now for 31 years, straight out of college. And,
Wow.
I can remember when I was, I don't know, I don't know the exact year, but I was 15, 16 years old. I read a book called How to Make a Fortune as a Public Speaker. Put your money where your mouth is.
Okay.
And it was something that talked about being able to make a living by talking. And I just thought that was crazy. In fact, later on in my career, when I sort of hit the pinnacle of my career, my mom said, I can't believe people pay you to do what I told you all those years to stop. And,
Right.
I was the guy, you remember in high school, you'd sit down in homeroom, the buzzer would buzz, and then the announcements would come on, today for lunch, we got fish sticks and tater tots,
Yeah.
side of corn. And then the announcements, varsity basketball tonight at 7. That was me. I did
That's what
I did the announcements in my last 2 years, my junior and senior year. I did the announcements. So I've always kind of talked, and I just figured it'd be a great way to get into business talking. And it's a great business. It's taken me all over the world. It's allowed me to help a lot of people. It's made me a lot of money, and it's a great career. I love doing it.
That's awesome. So you got your start doing the announcements in high school. Who would have known that
That's
was
it. And then in college, I was the in-house college basketball announcer. So, the guy that welcomed people to the stadium and did the starting lineups and announced every time a basket was hit and
right.
all that kind of stuff. So I even did that as well.
Wow. That is cool. So you've always been a big basketball fan?
Yeah, I'm a big basketball fan. I played basketball. I played high school basketball. I set my senior year. I set my high school's assist record. I led the league in steals and assists, and that I was a point guard and played basketball and then football and baseball as well.
Okay, right, and athletic. So as far as being a professional speaker, I know that's a foreign concept to many people. Can you give us some more context in terms of what does that entail?
Well, I guess you'd have to say, if you really want to just get very definitive, it means somebody pays you to show up and talk. That's, I guess, what makes you a professional, right? Is that somebody pays you to talk. There's lots of people who are doing them for free. But a professional speaker is someone who makes a living as a speaker. And I always say that speaking isn't really the business. Information is the business. Because, as a speaker, I have a podcast that I do called Fortunes from Speaking, and I interview speakers. And the only requirement is they have to be making at least $250,000 a year. If they're making $250,000 a year or more in speaking, that puts them in the top 1% of speakers. And so I have these folks on, and it's funny because one of my questions I ask is, tell us about your revenue streams. How do you make your money? And it's just fascinating to see all the different ways that people can make money being, quote unquote, a professional speaker. They obviously get paid when they show up and speak. So somebody might say, come and give a speech. Sure, it's $20,000. They write you a check and you show up and give a speech. There's other people that make money by not being paid anything to speak, but they sell audio programs in the back. I mean, I've made $140,000 in one day. Was my best day ever. Given a free 45-minute speech in Australia that I paid my way to get to 3,000 people who spent $140,000 buying my stuff in an hour.
Wow. That was a good return on investment.
Great return on investment. Now, a lot of professional speakers would say you should never speak for free. That's your job. Well, my job is to make money exchanging information with other people, and then they reward me by either paying me a fee or by, buying more products. You can make money. I've made money on podcasts where you sell sponsorships, and podcasts just another way for you to give your information. You can make money as a coach, individually or group, where people pay you to give them your information. So it's really an information business. You can do it through coaching, online courses. I've got an online course, the Chris Widener Speakers Academy. So you sell the information through a lot of different formats, and they can become, they can feed off of each other as well, right? If you show up and give a speech, they might pay you, let's say $10,000, show up and give a speech. And then you mention that you're a coach. as part of your speaking, and then 2 or 3 people ask you afterwards, hey, do you have any spots open for coaching? And now you bill your coaching clients $12,500 for the year, and you sell $10,000 worth of audio programs in the back. So let's add up the math. You got 10 to speak. You got $37,500 from 3 coaching clients, and you sold $10,000 worth of audio programs. So you're at $57,500 for
Wow.
one 45-minute speech.
Not a bad day's work.
Yeah. So you really have to look at it as ways to give away information.
Got it. So as far as what is your specialized information that you're selling?
Well, I've always been sort of in the general success, motivation, personal development. But what I speak on all over the world, this book has taken me everywhere, China, Russia, Singapore, Spain, Egypt, all over the US, is a book called The Art of Influence. And it's about how leaders and salespeople can gain trust, respect, admiration, and loyalty from the people that they lead and sell to. So I get hired by leadership companies, I get hired by sales companies, and they bring me in and I talk to them about how to influence other people.
Okay. All right. Clearly you must be good at it. It must be a really good book. I got to add that onto my to-read list, and I'll certainly start listening to your podcast.
Yeah, the Fortunes from Speaker podcast is really helpful because I get really great speakers on, and they spill the beans on how they do stuff, and they give good advice, and it's a fun, short podcast.
Okay, awesome. I think I was looking at a few episodes. I believe you interviewed Betsy Allen. I think she's here out here in Dallas, our North Texas chapter.
Yeah. So, Betsy is a former coaching client of mine. She coached with me back in 2017, and so she has built herself a really nice career.
Yeah, about to say, apparently she's put to work what she learned.
Yeah.
She's a great person. Awesome. Now, I guess for speakers, I'm sure you get a lot of, especially new speakers, who will reach out to you and it's like, how do you do it? How do you get to that level? What advice do you give to the speakers?
Well, I used to say, well, here, read these couple of books, and then call me in a month or two or whatever. And so what I do now, though, is I took the last 6 months of last year and I created a 63 video course. I invited 45 of my speaker friends, and together we've done $1 billion in the speaking industry.
Wow.
I mean, I've got people that are teaching in my academy who've literally made $70 million in the speaking business. And for example, Larry Wingett is a good buddy of mine, and Larry's made, $50 to $70 million in the speaking business. And he teaches the course on branding. So, we have a 30-minute, session with Larry on branding, and then just lots of other great speakers. And it covers every single aspect of the speaking business. It's not just about how to give a speech. There's a lot about the business, how to manage your finances, how to develop promotional materials, how to sell to the different kinds of people that can hire you. So we have one session on how to sell to a corporation, one session on how to sell to colleges and universities, one on how to sell to associations. So it's I believe the most comprehensive course ever developed for the professional speaking world. And now I tell people, look, it literally is, for the money, the best thing you can possibly do if you want to know how to build a business. If people say, well, okay, I'm not ready for that, tell me, I'll give them a couple books to read.
Okay.
But mainly the primary, first and foremost thing that anybody should do, and I would say not just as a speaker, but in business in general, is to understand the concept of positioning. And positioning, to be summed up by my friend Isabelle Mercier-Turcotte, who is a positioning and branding expert, she says positioning is when you can say that you are the first, the best, or the only.
Wow.
And the illustration I always give in regard to positioning, and again, your listeners, whether they're speakers or not, they need to define this for themselves in their own career. And every week for 20 years, I've recommended the book Positioning by Jack Trout and Al Reese is how you pronounce it. I interviewed his daughter the other day, and she told me it was Reese. But think about a plumber. If a poor person has a plumbing problem and they go to Google and they type, what do you suppose a poor person would type into the search engine if they're trying to find a plumber? What would a poor person type in?
Fix leak or
but if they're looking for a specific kind of plumber, they'd probably type in cheap plumber, right? Because they're poor.
Or keyword
If a rich person has a leak and they go to Google to find a plumber, what do you suppose?
They want the best plumber, number one plumber.
Now, if it's the middle of the night and you get up to go to the bathroom and you notice that there's, a big leak in your bathroom at 2 a.m, you run to Google and you don't search for the term best plumbers and you don't search for the term cheap plumbers.
Right.
You search for one of two terms: 24-hour plumbers or emergency plumbers.
Right.
That is positioning. It's how you position yourself in the marketplace.
Wow.
So it's interesting to me in the National Speaker Association, you have a lot of, not a lot, but it seems like a lot, of former fighter pilots who are now professional speakers. So it's funny how they position themselves. The first African-American woman to fly helicopters in combat,
right?
Versus the first female to fly F-14 Tomcats off an aircraft carrier, right? They're trying to create something in which they are the first, the best, or the only.
Right.
And so it's interesting to me, but that's really what you have to do. People who are already speakers will hire me to coach them, and I'm just like, who are you? Like, I had a guy, he's a chiropractor, and he said, well, I'm a chiropractor, I want to become a speaker. I said, great, you and 10,000 other chiropractors. Then he says, well, I've written a book. It's a very spiritual, mind-body connection kind of book. I said, great. Now it's just you and 1,000 other chiropractors.
Narrowed it down.
Right. But who are you? What makes you the first, the best, or the only? And until you can do that or narrow it down like that, I just wouldn't get started in any kind of business. It's the foremost thing that people have to do is they have to pick a lane, get in the lane. And, I was talking about polarizing with Isabel on the, or it might have been actually Laura Reese, who's also a branding expert. You really almost have to polarize. And I use as an example, the President of the United States. So it doesn't matter who wins the presidency every year, right? Or every 4 years when we elect the president. Half the country is going to
hate him. Yep.
So here's what I tell people. Half the entire country can despise you and you still become the most powerful person in the world.
Right.
And that's a lot with picking your position in the marketplace. If you are a children's dentist, adults are not going to come to you, but that's okay. You're going to be the children's dentist for that particular town, right? And then everybody with children will bring their children there. So you'll lose a bunch of people, but you'll gain the vast majority of a category. And that's really what positioning is about. So, don't just say, I'm a motivational speaker. Great. You and 15,000 other people.
Right.
Why should I hire you? Early on in my career, I didn't have a lot of, positioning. And I was living in Seattle, and I was born and raised in Seattle, spent my first 50 years there. And I had a buddy of mine, his name was Tom Flick. And Tom played for the University of Washington Huskies. He was quarterback, won a Rose Bowl, went to the NFL, and he was basically a backup quarterback for 12 years. He hardly ever played, but he played for like 12 years. Okay. And then Tom got out, and he became a speaker, and he's written a couple books. And when we were battling for speaking engagements up in the Seattle area, probably 6, 7, 8 times over the course of 10 years or so, I got word from the client that they had narrowed it down to 2 people. We've narrowed it down to just 2 people. We should be able to tell you next week. And I always said, who's the other person? And 6 or 8 times over the course of those 10 years, the answer was, oh, Tom Flick. And I know Tom. Tom's a buddy of mine. I like him, good guy. And I never once got the gig when it came down to me and Tom. And the reason why, he had a great positioning factor. He's a former NFL quarterback. So I
Okay.
think when it came down to it, it was like, well, we could do this guy. I mean, he sounds like he's great and everybody says he's great, but let's go with the NFL quarterback. I really honestly think that it was a positioning problem for me at that point.
Okay. Got it. That's some really valuable information you gave as far as positioning. It made me think about how am I positioning myself. So,
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if it's restaurants or doctors or plumbers. If you're going to open a restaurant, what's your restaurant? Is it going to be the high end Indian food, or is it going to be the low end fast food Indian
right.
food? Or, is it going to be the sit down, or is it going to be the takeout? There's all sorts of things that you can do to create distinction.
Okay. And I see how that can help a lot too with your marketing as well. Once
Absolutely.
you pick that niche, you know who to focus in on versus trying to market to everyone.
Yeah. And you can write your language to the marketing, right? If you're
Right.
targeting millennials, you don't ever talk about retirement. You're talking to a bunch of 20, 25-year-olds, right? You're writing to them. So you talk to them and in their language.
Understood. Wow. All right. Well, Chris, you definitely already paid off. That's some valuable information right there. I hope the listeners are taking notes. So, Chris, I guess since you've been around so long as far as being a professional speaker, have you worked with anyone that we may know?
Yeah, I've worked with quite a few people. I started out ghostwriting for a guy named John Maxwell, who
I've heard of him.
very big professional speaker, author.
Right.
Worked with him in 2001, 2002. And then I spent 7 years, the last 7 years of his life, working with a guy named Jim Rohn, legendary in the speaking world. Gave Tony Robbins his first job. Most people don't know that. Tony's first job was selling Jim Rohn seminars. And I tried to find it the other day on YouTube. You can find almost all of our speeches from Jim Rohn Memorial, but for some reason I wasn't able to find Tony's. But on YouTube, you can hear the memorial service. I spoke at Jim's memorial service, and Tony did too. And he told the story about, going off and selling Jim's seminars and how he learned the seminar business and such. And then I ended up with a television show with Zig Ziglar that we recorded for about a year and a half down in Dallas. Met a lot of great people over the years. There's a lot of really great professional speakers out there, and fortunate to call a lot of them very good friends.
Wow. All right. He definitely knows some some heavyweights, some people in some high places. That's fantastic. All right. So, Chris, I'm wondering what keeps you inspired, motivated when you're especially traveling? I know it could be a grind being a professional speaker.
Well, it's interesting. I'm a very self-driven person. I don't have a lot of need for outside stimulus to get me to go. I've always been a hustler, always been looking for ways to do things and grow, and I love to learn. And so I have a lot of internal drive. But I think probably one thing, and it's a little bit morbid, but when I was 4 years old, my dad died, and so I became acutely aware, even at an early age, about the finality of death and how we only have one life. And Jim Rohn and I write in our book, 12 Pillars, you cannot determine how long you live, but you can determine how well you live. And I have just determined to live well, to do great things, to think big. It's just as easy to think big as it is to think small. And so, I've attempted some really big things and hit the ball out of the park, and I've attempted some really big things and lost my shirt. So, I've had a lot of great successes and I've had some big failures. But Teddy Roosevelt, quote, "Far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much, because twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat." I haven't quoted that in a long time. Came right off my head. But basically, it's just basically saying it's better to try and to fail than to never try. And so that's always been my thing, man. Just go out and give it a try. Don't worry about anybody that's going to hate you because you failed, because they're not going to like you anyway. So live your life, do your thing. That's the beautiful thing about life, is we all just get to choose whatever it is that makes us happy. And some people, man, they love nothing better than getting under a car and getting their hands oily and pulling things apart and fixing things. And I wouldn't do that if my life depended on it. But they love it, and I don't. I love to get up and give speeches, and most of the world, it's their biggest fear. So, that's the cool thing is find out what it is that you love and then go do it. And if you can make a living at it, great. If you can't, maybe you do it on weekends. You make your money some other way, and then on weekends you pursue that real fun thing that you love to do.
Ah, all right. Great advice. How do you feel that speakers should really maximize the opportunity of being a professional speaker?
Well, I think being a professional speaker is a lot like being an entrepreneur. So some people are more readily available to become entrepreneurs than others. A young man or young woman who's 25 years old and has no debt and doesn't have to spend a lot of money, they can go get started, and they're not taking a huge risk. A 40-year-old with a spouse and 3 kids with a mortgage, a little harder to just dump everything and run off and start your new business. So
Right.
I would say, first of all, just take a look at who you are and what your life circumstances are, your tolerance for risk. But that being said, I think that people can, and frankly, I think a lot of people should start speaking as a side business. I did. The first 14 years of my career, I did it as a side business. Then I went full time in 2002, and then that's when my career really took off. And I had a really good, strong career prior to that, even as a side business. But then in 2002, when I went full time, it really just took off. But I think there's lots of people that, even if they were never going to go do it full time because they like their day job, maybe you're an insurance agent or a real estate agent or something like that. Write a book about it, because that book is going to position you as an authority. And then you're going to get asked to speak. Let's say you're a local realtor and you write a book, 7 deadly sins home sellers make, right? Or 7 mistakes home buyers make, or put it in the positive, 7 mistakes smart home buyers don't make. And you create this book and you provide a lot of value. You might even break even or make a little bit of money on the book. But now it's an advertising piece for you. And people are like, well, you know what? I don't want to make a mistake when I sell my house. So I'm going to call Joe, because Joe's going to make sure I don't make those mistakes, because I read his book and it was really good. Well, now you make $30,000 on your commission, right? And maybe you only got paid $250 to go speak at the Chamber of Commerce. But when
Right.
somebody sells a $1 million house and your cut is 30 grand,
Yeah.
or whatever, you got paid for that speech.
I like that. And that's something I've learned the hard way. I got started in speaking after getting laid off. So I figured, okay, I'm going to go all in on the speaking thing, but I have a lot of responsibilities, wife, house, all of that stuff. And after about a year, I realized, okay, I've made a lot of progress, but I may need to go back to getting a paycheck and still build my business on the side. And that's working a lot better for me now. I'm not as stressed. And hey, now I'm off to the clock right now, and I'm doing this podcast, still working on building my business. And that really gives me some great encouragement knowing that you did it part-time speaking for the first 14 years.
14 years, yeah.
So, that's great. Great insight. And definitely advise anyone the same, definitely. But as you mentioned, someone young with not a lot of responsibilities, they can go take all in and see what happens. And it's different, multiple ways to do everything. It's not just one way. So
that is true.
Totally agree. So being that this show does focus on mentorship, what role have mentors played in your success?
Man, I've had great mentors. And, I was a crazy kid growing up. I was a troublemaker. My sophomore year of high school, I had 47 written referrals to the principal's office.
Wow.
So I started drugs in the 6th grade. I made most of my money growing up betting the horses at Long Acres Horse Track and scalping tickets to Mariners games and Seahawks games. And, I had a crazy upbringing. And when I look back at my life, I think sports, my job with the Sonics, and some key mentors along the way really kept me in the game. I had a high school teacher who was tough on me, but treated me fairly, told me that I could become something. I had a youth minister at the little local Lutheran church where I went to, and he believed in me. think a lot of what I got from mentors was people who believed in me. They saw my talent, and they saw past my the destruction I was causing out of the anger and hurt of having lost my dad.
Right.
And so in college, I had a guy who put me in charge of everybody in our college was required to do some sort of charitable giving, giving back to the community. So every Saturday night through college, I spent down on Skid Road in downtown Seattle, serving the poor, sandwiches, playing chess with them it was a place called the Sunshine Inn. That professor, as a freshman, put me in charge of that team, and because he saw something in me, and that meant a lot. And then when I got out of college, my first job in northern New Jersey, I served on the board of a nonprofit. And one of the, there were a number of guys that were on that board that sort of took me under their wing. But one of the guys that ended up making a big difference in my life was, at the time, he was senior vice president of Mars Candies. He ended up CEO of Mars Candies. So I had a lot of really good business mentors right out of college. And
Wow.
so mentors have been huge for me. And then, of course, in the speaking business, working with Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar, and seeing how they built their careers and how they did their speeches and how they lived their lives and things like that, all very, very helpful to me.
Awesome. You said something that really resonated with me earlier, as far as it takes the same amount of energy to think small as it does to think big. Do you think that just that limited mindset is what prevents a lot of people from reaching their full potential, that level of success?
It does. I think I'll tell you a story about mindset. It's interesting you bring that up. And mindset is groomed into us. It's what we learn to believe about the world. It's called worldview. So your mindset is your world, how you perceive the world. And I'll tell you a story. My son was 21 years old, and he went to get a job at a mattress company called Sleep Country. And Sleep Country Sleep Train owned 300 stores between Seattle and San Diego. They're now owned by Mattress Firm. And Christopher shows up, and when he shows up, the regional manager who was going to interview him said, "Oh, it's your lucky day. The CEO of the whole company's here. He's going to sit in on your interview." So the CEO, the founder and CEO of this company, sitting in there, the regional director, and then the local director. So
Wow.
3 people.
Pressure's on.
Yeah, pressure's on, and they interview him. And at the very end, the CEO says, "So if you hit 50% of your goals, you'll make about $50,000 a year. If you hit 75% of your goals, you'll make $75,000 a year. If you hit 100% of your goals, you'll make $100,000 a year. And if you hit 120% of your goals, you'll make $120,000 a year. Which one are you?" And my son laughed. And he could tell by the look of these 3 grown men's faces, he wasn't supposed to laugh. And then he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, 120% to goal to make the $120,000. And then he paused and he looked at him. He said, "Does anybody ever answer anything else?" And they looked and they said, "Yeah, almost no one says that." And so they said, "Thank you very much. We'll let you know in a week." And 20 minutes later, the phone rings. He's driving home. The phone rings, says, "Dan," that was the owner of the company. "Dan loved your answer so much, he says you're hired."
Wow.
Within a year, Christopher was the number 1 salesman in 300 stores. But where it really comes down to is he comes home to me, and I can still remember where we were sitting, and he says, "Dad, why would anybody say anything other than the top one?" And I said, "Well, let's take, for example, someone who grew up in a poor family. Maybe nobody had ever gone to college. Maybe the richest guy they know is their uncle, and they see him 3 or 4 times a year, and he makes $75,000 a year. You grew up in a home with a dad who made a lot of money and friends who made even more money. A lot of millionaire friends and very wealthy friends who were around the house and just in conversation, a friend of mine, real estate guy, he'd say, and my son would be there, and he'd say, "Oh, I just bought a new real estate or apartment complex." "Oh, really? How many apartments in it?" "It's 100. "Oh, what'd you pay for it?" $8 million. I said, "Christopher, you grew up with this worldview that people make lots of money and it's okay to make lots of money. And it wasn't foreign to you. Someone who grew up in a poorer home, it may just be so foreign to them that they couldn't possibly imagine making more than $100,000 a year because they literally don't know anyone who
Right.
makes more than 100. And that's groomed and that's set into us. People say, well, we're not, what do you mean you're going to college? We don't go to college in this family. We're blue collar people, right?
Right.
And it's this worldview. And so I think that we do need to break out of that worldview. We do need to, realize that there's other ways to do things, and that our attitude and our mindset and our worldview could very well be limiting us in many ways from what we could achieve.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I myself growing up poor in poverty, I call it that poverty mindset,
Yeah.
where a lot of times when people grow up poor, they have like kind of negative view of people who make a lot of money, like they're evil.
Yeah.
So if you have that mentality, of course, you're not going to strive to be rich and successful. And so,
Well, and think about it. Think about it this way. Take a poor person and they win the lottery for $2 million. Let's say they clear $2 million after
Right.
taxes. They hand them a check, $2 million.
Yep.
If you put that into, say, a municipal bond and you get 6% interest,
Pretty safe. Yeah.
tax-free, 6% interest, that is $120,000 a year just in interest.
Nice.
Just throwing off the
Principle
payment.
still there.
Right. Now this person has never made more than $40,000 a year in their entire life.
Right.
You hand them $2 million. All they have to do is sign a slip of paper and hand it to an investment advisor, and they will get $120,000 a year for the rest of their life.
Mhm.
And what do?
Spend it all.
They spend it all.
Spend it
And they
all.
go right back to being poor.
Yep.
Your mindset is like a thermostat. The thermostat tells what temperature the room is supposed to be. What you think about your weight, what you think about your wealth, what you think about your marriage, what you think you are, you will become. So just like if I have it set at 72 and I open up the doors here in Arizona right now, it's going to heat up really fast. And as soon as I shut the doors, what will the thermostat do? It'll take it right back down to 72. That's what it does. And your mindset is very similar. It's why I think people lose weight and then gain it back, lose weight and gain it back, lose weight and gain it back, because they don't see themselves as a skinny person. They see themselves as a fat person.
Right.
It's why you can take a really, really rich person, take all their money away from them, make them lose it, and they get it back. Why? Because they think like a rich person.
Right. They know the formula. Absolutely. That's some really great advice, Chris. So, Chris, as we start to wrap up this interview, what, parting words of advice would you leave the listeners with?
Well, I'll always leave you the best piece of advice I ever got, and that was be a voice, not an echo. And a lot of people out there just regurgitating stuff that other people are saying, and it's really, we need more voices and a lot less echoes. We need people who will think, who will grow, who will move. There'll be movers and shakers, and they'll lead people. And you've got to be a voice, not an echo.
I'm a big fan of quotes, and I've never heard that one. I like it a lot.
Thank you. I'll tell you the strange story about how I got that advice. I was at a conference when I was 23 years old, and I was walking through this big room. All the people from the conference were there. It was the second morning of the conference, and I'm standing there, and I turn around briefly, and I see a woman and her daughter. They were probably 55 and 30. And the daughter gets a look on her face like she's seen a ghost. When she looks at me, she looks like she's seen a ghost. And the older woman, obviously her mother, turns to her and says, "Is that him?" And she says, "It is him." And I said, "What?" And the mother said she woke up in the middle of the night. She had this dream that was so powerful and so profound. She woke me up to tell me about it. She had seen a guy in her dream that she was supposed to give some advice to. And I'm like, okay, so, and she's like, she saw your face in her dream last night. I'd never met these people.
Wow.
It was 2,000 miles away from my home. And so the mom says to the daughter, "Well, give him the advice." And she looked at me and she said, "I'm supposed to tell you to be a voice, not an echo."
That is
one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me in my entire life. But it turned out to be pretty good for being a professional speaker.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something you'll never forget.
Never forget it. I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Wow. That's great. Well, Chris, how can the listeners get in contact with you?
Sure. Lots of different ways. They can Google my name. That's really easy. Amazon and Audible is really easy. If they're interested in some coaching, some personal coaching, whether it's for speaking business or life or business, they can go to widenercoaching.com. They can get a free 15-minute consultation. And if they're interested in learning the speaker's business, they want those 63 videos from 45 of the best speakers of our generation. They can go to wideneracademy.com and they can find it there.
Fantastic. And it's funny you said Google you. So when I had Googled you earlier, I saw you had a Wikipedia page. Like, oh man, this guy's a big deal. You get it on Wikipedia page. That is great. Well, Chris, it's certainly been a pleasure interviewing you, and you've given us a lot of great advice. Certainly I've been taking a lot of notes, and I'm putting a lot of that to good use. I really appreciate it. I'm sure the listeners are going to benefit from it. And I'll certainly list all your contact information in the show notes when I release it, and certainly encourage them to reach out to you.
Great.
Wealth of knowledge, and really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks, Derek.
Pleasure. That was a fabulous interview with Chris Widener. He shared over 31 years of professional speaking experience with us. He's just very candid about his background, childhood, just all the things and people who made an impact in his life and helped him become the world-known speaker that he is today. He's an author, he's a coach, hosts a podcast as well. So I'm just really honored to have Chris stop by the Mentor Select podcast to share his virtual mentorship with us. Be sure to reach out to Chris. I'll have all his contact information in the show notes, and just let him know what resonated with you about the interview, anything you're going to apply to your life starting today. Why wait? But on that note, I'll be back next week with another guest mentor, so be sure to tune in.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Mentor Select podcast, helping you identify and follow your passions. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit mentorselect.com and Mentor Select on social media. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review. We'll catch you next time.